Imagine waking up one day and realizing the voice that has been guiding your every decision, the one that sounds like you, that wears your memories, that knows your plans, has been quietly bargaining your life down to a manageable size. It's polite about it. It calls this caution, maturity, realism. It introduces itself as your protector, your sense of self, the one who keeps you from humiliation, from loss, from risk. But as you stand in the bathroom light and stare at your own reflection, a strange suspicion ripples through you. How much of your life is a compromise you never consciously agreed to? You try to name it. Success, safety, identity. Each word feels like a fitted suit you grew into and then outgrew, but still wear because it's familiar, because it tells other people who you are and tells you who to be around them. You've curated a self like a storefront, spotless and convincing. It looks like capability. It smells like control, but there's a locked back room no one sees and you can hear something alive in there, pacing. What if the ego, this beloved center of gravity you call me, doesn't want a big life? Not really. What if it wants a predictable life? What if it wants to be right more than it wants to be free? You think back to the times you said no and called it discernment. The promotions you didn't pursue because you weren't ready yet. The late night ideas you never pitched because someone else could laugh. The experiments you postponed until you felt more confident, more credentialed, more certain. You wear your restraint like virtue, but is it? Or is it fear in ceremonial robes? Consider the paradox. The ego tells you that being small is the safest way to be big. Keep it manageable. Don't go too far. Don't be too noisy, too visible, too original. The ego equates exposure with danger and novelty with death. It warns you about the edges of yourself like cliffs. It says, stay on the paved roads. It says, avoid the wilderness. And yet, every moment you've ever felt truly alive, didn't it happen somewhere out past the fences? Ask yourself what you would risk if embarrassment didn't feel fatal. If being wrong didn't register as existential, if change felt like weather, not apocalypse, what would you create? Who would you love? What truths would you stop apologizing for? You have a story about yourself. It's an anchor and a chain. You cling to it because you think it's you, but it was assembled from parents' wishes, teachers' praises, peers' approval, the culture's instructions, and your own careful edits of events. You call it my personality. But what if your personality is not a fact? It's a strategy. What if smallness isn't a failure of ambition, but a success of defense? The ego's logic is seductively simple. If you never stretch beyond what you already know you can do, you will never be humiliated. If you never ask for more than you've already been given, you will never be rejected. If you never speak what truly burns in you, you will never be misunderstood. It gives you a life without bruises, but it is also a life without flight. You can feel it in your body when the ego is steering. Your voice gets careful. Your posture narrows. Your calendar fills with the reasonable. You tinker with plans because building is safer than leaping. You seek reassurance because agreement feels like oxygen. You chase competence because mastery looks like permission to be alive. Meanwhile, a quieter intelligence in you keeps tapping the glass, asking whether competence is the point or just the camouflage. Who would you be if you stopped defending your idea of yourself? Not who would approve, not who would pay you, not who would be comfortable, but who would you be? How much of what you label as realistic is actually fear's vocabulary, made eloquent by repetition? How much of your gentleness is self-censorship? And how much of your confidence is a well-tailored avoidance? There's a peculiar grief that comes when you suspect you have been living at 60% brightness because 100% might offend someone, might fail, might be inconvenient to the self you've promised the world. And yet the grief is also a door. The question opening behind it is stark, almost frightening in its simplicity. Do you want to be safe from aliveness, or safe in aliveness? The ego will offer you statistics. It will cite past injuries, collect evidence, present caution as wisdom. It is tireless and persuasive. It has kept you alive. But now, under the hum of polite certainty, you hear a fiercer rhythm, a life not yet lived, insisting. What if the bars of your cage are made from the very traits you admire? Competence, niceness, reliability. What if the ceiling of your potential is held up by your need to be seen as a good person? The reasonable one? The expert? What if your reputation is the small room where you're performing for applause, while the wilderness, where your real work wants to be born, waits unchoreographed and vast? Something in you already knows. That's why the compliments don't land like they used to. That's why the winds feel thinner. That's why the calendar you design in feels like a trap built with love. So here is the great question that will not leave you alone. Is the you you're protecting worth the life you're losing? You don't have to answer it yet. Let it sit in your mouth like an unsaid truth. Let it follow you into your routines and whisper at the edges of your accomplishments. You are not guilty, only invited. And if you choose to accept the invitation, we will need to unmask the devoted guardian at the center of your days, the one who calls itself you, and see what it's really protecting and why. Because once you understand the machinery of smallness, you can begin to dismantle it. The hidden problem and its psychological, philosophical roots. The guardian you're about to meet is not a villain. It's a builder. It built you. It learned your household weather, what got praised, what got punished. It learned your culture's grammar, what counted as respectable, what counted as shameful. It learned how to keep you fed on approval, safe from exile. And then it made a vow without telling you. Never again will we feel that particular kind of pain. From that vow, a map. From that map, a self. From that self, a life that fits the map. Jung would call this the persona, the mask that allows you to move through the tribe without being torn apart by it. At first, it's a costume, useful, flexible, protective. Then one day it hardens. You forget that you put it on. You mistake it for skin. Meanwhile, the parts of you that didn't get invited to the stage, the anger you learned to swallow, the creativity you learned to dim, the desire you learned to dock it, move into the basement. That basement is what Jung called the shadow. The irony is painful. Your unlived life waits in the very place you are convinced is dangerous to visit. Nietzsche warned of the herd instinct, the way collective comfort seduces the individual into trading vitality for belonging. He didn't mean community is bad. He meant that the herd's morality can become a lullaby that puts your wild questions to sleep. In this lullaby, smallness gets renamed as virtue. Don't be presumptuous. Don't be too much. Be reasonable. Be correct. Seek consensus. The will to power, Nietzsche's name for your drive to actualize your capacities, shrinks into the will to be acceptable. And so you become responsible in a way that starves you. Schopenhauer went darker. Beneath our ideas and identities, he said, lives a blind, relentless will, always pushing, never satisfied. Your ego is the translator that tries to make that will look civilized. It edits your urges, negotiates your appetites, keeps you just comfortable enough to function. But because the will never stops wanting, the ego learns to ration desire to avoid the horror of endless hunger. Don't want too much, it whispers. You'll suffer less. You call this modesty. It's often exhaustion. Sartre diagnosed another mechanism, bad faith. It's what happens when you collapse your freedom into a role, when you decide you are nothing more than a teacher, a manager, a parent, an introvert, a survivor. Roles are simpler than freedom. They come with scripts. They make you legible to others and to yourself. But the price is steep. You start living as an object in your own life, a thing that behaves according to expectations, not a consciousness choosing moment by moment. You become stable, yes, and heavy. Huxley imagined a world where people never have to feel the friction of meaning because the system bathes them in predictable pleasures. That world is not fiction anymore. We built it into our pockets and our routines. Your ego uses it like anesthesia. Scroll, perform, compare, medicate, optimize. Predictability becomes a narcotic that keeps the deeper question from knocking at the door. Who are you beyond who you've rehearsed? Psychology gives the machinery a clinical vocabulary. Attachment says your earliest caretakers taught your nervous system what love feels like: safe, inconsistent, or dangerous, and you still unconsciously test the world to confirm that template. Intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive schedule, means that every once in a while your performance gets rewarded, so you keep performing, hoping for the next pellet. Cognitive dissonance insists you align your beliefs with your behavior. So if you play small long enough, you start believing you are small. The inner critic is the superego's voice. Internalized parents, teachers, ex-lovers, bosses, speaking as if the universe has one disappointed opinion. Even your brain's predictive machinery conspires with smallness. It's built to minimize surprise because surprise threatens survival. The unfamiliar is flagged as error. The ego folds itself around that mandate and calls it wisdom. Avoid the uncharted because the uncharted is costly. But the map is not the territory, and when your map becomes a shrine, you stop walking. Jung again, what you repress doesn't vanish. It constellates. The shadow doesn't just sit quietly, it leaks through sarcasm, procrastination, compulsions, inexplicable fatigue. When you say, "I don't know why I do that," the shadow shrugs. "I do." Your ego keeps polishing the persona to compensate. It tightens the smile, sharpens the resume, refines the sophistication of your arguments. You become a masterpiece of avoidance. If this were only personal, it would be tragic enough. But the culture rewards your mask. You get promoted for reliability, not for depth. You get applauded for consistency, not for evolution. You get matched for agreeableness, not for truth. Systems love predictability because predictability scales. The individual spirit does not. So society hands your ego a medal for keeping you manageable and calls it maturity. Frankel sits in the corner, not arguing so much as waiting, and then he offers a key. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is your freedom and your power. The ego hates that space because space invites uncertainty, and uncertainty invites the possibility that you are more than you have proven. So the ego compresses that space with reflexes. It speeds up your answers. It fills silence with explanations. It cannot imagine that you could survive mystery. Here is the hidden problem in its simplest shape. The ego is a contraction around pain. It contracted for good reasons, to keep you safe, attached, alive. But a muscle held in a permanent clench stops being strength and becomes a cramp. The clamp of identity that kept you from falling apart when you were small now keeps you from growing when you are strong enough to risk it. Why don't you see this sooner? Because the ego uses your own virtues to hide itself. It borrows your empathy so you avoid conflict and call it kindness. It borrows your intellect so you rationalize stagnation and call it prudence. It borrows your discipline so you perfect routines that protect you from the embarrassment of beginning again. It even borrows your spirituality so you bypass the rawness of being human with aphorisms about acceptance, gratitude, surrender, beautiful words when true, lethal when rehearsed. And beneath all of this runs a philosophy of being that you didn't know you believed, that you are what has happened to you, that you are the sum of your performances, that you are the character other people can reliably predict. You don't call this a philosophy, you call it being realistic. But it is a metaphysics of smallness, and it is optional. Notice the paradox sharpening. You protect yourself by shrinking yourself. You secure belonging by cutting off the parts of you that might make you uniquely worth belonging to. You equate control with safety, while the parts of you that could meet life as it is, curiosity, courage, wonder, atrophy from underuse. You call this a personality. It is a defense that succeeded so well it started calling itself you. We are not here to punish the protector. We are here to unmask it, not to declare war on your ego. War is just more ego, but to recognize the outdated terms of a contract you never consciously signed. The child needed that contract. The adult can renegotiate it. If you do not, the consequences won't always look like catastrophes. Some will look like achievements. That is how insidious this is. You can build an entire life that earns applause, and still be haunted by the sense that you never encountered your real magnitude. You can obey every rule of the map and never touch the territory of yourself. What does that cost you, and what does it cost the world that needed what only you could have brought? To answer, you'll have to see how smallness plays out in daily life, in decisions you think are neutral, in the glances you don't notice, in the dreams you downgrade into plans. The mask doesn't just conceal, it redirects your destiny. The unseen consequences. Look at an ordinary morning. You reach for your phone before your feet touch the floor. Your thumb scrolls while your mind negotiates with the day. You call it catching up. Your nervous system calls it calibration. What's expected of me? What are people like me posting? Where are the lines today? You read and adjust, tiny edits to your attitude, your plans, your tone. You don't notice the cost because it's paid in coins too small to see. A little less wonder, a little more rehearsal. Then the emails. You compose, delete, recompose, swap a daring line for a polite one. You remove the sentence that made your stomach flutter because it might be too much, and your ego rewards you with a calm you mistake for wisdom. In the meeting, you almost speak up, then wait so long someone else says a safer version. They get the nods. You get the relief. Do that twice a week for 10 years and call it experience. The invisible consequence is a personality shaped by avoidance and justified by etiquette. Cognitive biases do much of the lifting. Loss aversion makes potential embarrassment feel twice as heavy as potential gain feels bright. The spotlight effect convinces you everyone is watching when most are rehearsing their own lines and projecting their own anxieties. Status quo bias whispers that continuity equals safety. Sunk cost fallacy answers that you've come too far being this version of yourself to pivot now. Confirmation bias cherry picks any proof that you should stay in your lane. It's a latticework of protective stories, and the stories become architecture. Underneath, your brain is doing its ancient job. The amygdala is not poetic, it just wants you to survive. It flags deviation as danger, not because deviation is bad, but because unknowns were historically where predators hid. The predictive machinery of your cortex fills in the blank spaces with yesterday's patterns. Novelty is coded as error. The default mode network spins a narrative that keeps you coherent, because coherence feels safe. The salience network prioritizes what matches your map. The prefrontal cortex, competent and proud, crafts rationalizations that turn this entire cascade into an argument for remaining exactly as you are. Each system is doing you a favor. The aggregate favors smallness. So what? Isn't a calm, predictable life a reasonable goal? Sometimes yes, but count the casualties that don't bleed. The creative project that keeps receding into a when I have more time horizon. The relationship that never risks the conversation that would either deepen it or end it, so it hovers in polite limbo. The career that advances by increments you didn't choose because the ladder is already built and easy to climb. You wanted a fire, you got a thermostat. The ego pretends to be your seatbelt, but sometimes it's the parking brake. You tell yourself you're preserving optionality by not committing to the hard thing that would make you visible. In reality, you're letting entropy make your choices for you. Boredom grows a dense moss and calls it stability. You notice you're tired in ways sleep doesn't fix. You become extraordinarily competent at tasks that do not require your soul. Even your joy gets domesticated. Pleasure arrives as a drip feed of novelty you don't have to risk anything to receive. The algorithm's next recommendation, the sale, the like, the congratulatory ping. Dopamine fires not for satisfaction, but for anticipation. The chase, not the catch. The more your ego relies on this steady drizzle, the less it tolerates the droughts that deeper work demands. Long arcs of creation require you to be bored and invisible for stretches. The ego, addicted to measurable applause, taps out. This shapes how you love too. You select partners who confirm your story of yourself. If your script says you're the reliable one, you'll pair with someone who needs reliability and resent them for needing you. If your script says you're the difficult genius, you'll choose admirers over equals and lament being misunderstood. Intimacy becomes the management of impressions rather than the collision of truths. Conflict is treated as a PR crisis, not a portal. You become a curator of yourself, even in bed, even in grief. In groups, the consequences multiply. Teams prefer consensus because it feels efficient. The loudest rationality in the room wins, even when it's just fear wearing a tie. Meetings reward the person who can articulate a risk more clearly than someone else can articulate a possibility. Organizations develop immune systems against wildness and call that risk management. Innovation departments sprout like decorative plants in lobbies, while real novelty is starved at the root. You can feel the air thin in these rooms. Everyone is breathing carefulness. Culturally, the performance of identity becomes the economy. Platforms reward outrage and certainty, which are easy to perform and market. Nuance doesn't go viral because nuance can't be summed up in a slogan. So you learn to flatten yourself into a brand. You might still be sincere, but sincerity curated for maximum reach becomes a form of self-surveillance. You scan yourself for deviations from your brand's promise and prune them. The world applauds your consistency. What they are applauding is a narrowing. The psychological cost registers as a vague ache, the sense of watching your life rather than inhabiting it. You keep thinking you need a vacation, a sabbatical, a change of scenery. Sometimes you do. Often you need a change of story, one that allows you to be surprising to yourself again. Meanwhile, the nervous system keeps getting trained. Every time you choose safety over aliveness, you strengthen the association between smallness and survival. Vagal tone adjusts to a world where low stakes feel like home. High stakes presence starts to feel like threat instead of expansion. You might call this maturity. You might also call it learned smallness. The unseen consequence is not only what you don't do, it's what you train yourself to be unable to do. Procrastination becomes a neural groove, not just a habit. Self-censorship becomes a reflex faster than you can witness. Courage atrophies like an unused muscle. Joy does too. When someone asks what you want, you give them what you think is possible because your capacity to want beyond the possible has been filed down to avoid the friction of disappointment. And then there's the world's loss. The absence of the book you didn't write becomes someone else's unanswered question. The company you didn't build leaves a gap in the value chain you were meant to disrupt. The truth you didn't speak allows a lie to establish itself as common sense. The kindness you withheld because you didn't want to be awkward deprives someone of the moment that might have kept them going. Your smallness doesn't harm only you, it deprives the commons of your gifts. This is how quiet the trap is. You can keep winning inside it. You can become the most admired prisoner on your block. You can teach seminars on the architecture of your cell. You can be rewarded for reinforcing it in other people. Raising careful children, managing careful teams, voting for careful leaders. You can call this stewardship, and sometimes it is. And sometimes it is complicity with a system that monetizes your risk aversion. The most dangerous part is that the ego can recruit your language of healing to reinforce its project. Therapy becomes a place to become even more articulate about your wounds, not a place to become more free. Spirituality becomes a way to manage your anxiety instead of dissolving the need to be managed. Productivity becomes a way to avoid the sacred laziness in which new life forms. You don't notice because everything looks like progress. The measurements go up, the aliveness goes down. If you're honest, you can feel the gravitational pull. You've felt it for years. You've made peace with it on Tuesdays, rebelled against it on Fridays, and forgotten it on Sundays. You know it will outlive your resolutions unless you do something stranger than optimizing your calendar. The cost of not noticing is not dramatic collapse. It's a slow fade. The tragedy is not that you burn out. It's that you never burn at all. And yet, if all of this is learned, it can be unlearned. If your brain is predictive, you can change what it predicts by changing what you prove. If your biases tilt you towards safety, you can design experiments where failure is cheap and discovery is priceless. If your culture rewards smallness, you can build subcultures, teams, friendships, rituals, where largeness is the norm. If your ego is a contract, you can renegotiate. But what does a revolt against smallness look like without simply creating a bigger, shinier ego? What does rebellion look like when the goal is not performance, but presence. Not spectacle, but freedom. The rebellion. How to break free. Rebellion doesn't start with a roar. It starts when you stop negotiating with the guard at the door. It starts when you decide to disappoint your persona to belong to your life. Not war. War is more theater. This is a jailbreak with a quiet hinge. You shift from being seen to seeing, from protecting an image to serving a truth. The first counterintuitive move: take your eyes off yourself. Not forever, just long enough to remember that you were not built to be admired. You were built to participate. Ask, in plain language, what is needed here that only someone fully awake could offer? Then give that, imperfectly, before you feel ready. The ego wants readiness as a prerequisite to action. Reverse it. Act to generate readiness. Confidence is not a condition for courage. It is a result. Make a pact with yourself. 1 hour a day in the arena. No polishing, no optimizing, no waiting for the right mood. The arena hour is where you practice being larger than your comfort. You send the email that risks a no. You make the ask that would embarrass you if refused. You draft the chapter that might be bad. You pitch the idea that may cost you face. You don't do it for outcomes. You do it because your nervous system needs proof that the unknown will not end you. Each proof rewrites prediction. The amygdala learns from experiences, not theories. Begin training with small humiliations. That's the medicine. Seek situations where your cheeks warm and your stomach drops, but your life isn't at stake. Return a dish at a restaurant because it isn't what you ordered. Ask for a discount. Post a rough version. Raise your hand first. Admit, in a room that values certainty, I don't know. This is micro-exposure therapy for a psyche over-attached to approval. Each time you survive, the spotlight effect dims, loss aversion loosens, the predictive brain updates. You become less allergic to visibility. You learn that embarrassment is not fatal, only human. Practice persona fasting. For a day, don't mention your job title, your achievements, your brand. Introduce yourself by what you care about, not by what you've done. Better, don't introduce yourself at all. Ask real questions. Listen like you're learning a language. Feel the withdrawal when you can't cash social currency with your identity. Keep going. This is not self-erasure. This is self-decoupling. You are remembering that your dignity doesn't hang on the costume. Make space and keep it empty. Frankel's space, the slit between what hits you and what you do next, doesn't widen by accident. Practice silence like a musician practices scales. In conversation, wait 3 seconds longer than is comfortable before responding. In conflict, breathe down into your body until the first reflex passes and the second, truer response arrives. The vagus nerve is your ally. A slower exhale is a message to your entire system. It is safe to stay open. From that safety, you can choose novelty over habit. Interview your shadow. Take a page to let the disowned part speak. Ask the too much part why it's been loud. Ask the angry part what it's protecting. Ask the ambitious part what it would build if it didn't have to apologize. Don't cross-examine, transcribe. Integration is rebellion's engine. Energy that was spent on suppression returns to circulation. Jung didn't ask you to become your shadow. He asked you to stop pretending you don't have one. When you befriend your outlaw energies, the ego loses its favorite argument, that you're too dangerous to unleash. Shift your metrics. The culture will measure you by what can be counted: revenue, followers, titles, scores. Your rebellion uses a different ledger. Today's scorecard reads, did I trade approval for truth at least once? Did I make one real ask? Did I spend minutes in the unknown without anesthetic? Did I move my body as if aliveness is safe? Did I create before I consumed? You don't need all yeses. You need enough to tilt the day toward expansion. The point is not asceticism, it's allegiance. Find a small cell of co-conspirators. 3 to 5 is plenty. Choose people who want freedom more than comfort, who will not collude with your persona, who will hold your feet in the fire without burning you. Meet weekly. Each person declares one charged risk for the coming week, the kind that would make your ego negotiate. The group listens, reflects, asks, what becomes possible if you do this? What dies if you don't? No rescuing, no advice unless asked. You are building a microculture where largeness is the baseline. Systems shape selves. Choose one that rewards your rebellion. Anchor yourself in work that doesn't care about your image. Beethoven wrote his late quartets when his audience had already moved on. He was writing for the real. Rosa Parks didn't perform defiance. She sat because something truer than permission had ripened. An unknown teacher shows up for a child who will never applaud them online. Devotion is the solvent for ego's theater. Choose a project, a cause, a craft, a person, a patch of earth that is worthy of your best. Give it the hours your brand would spend preening. Service is not self-abandonment. It's self-remembering in a larger frame. Subtract to expand. The ego wants more habits, more hacks, more content. Your rebellion starts by pruning. Remove one performative commitment. Quit one group where you are rewarded for being small. Turn off metrics for a month. No analytics, no step counts, no likes. Let your nervous system remember the taste of unmeasured life. Don't confuse lack of tracking with lack of care. You are cultivating an internal sense of rightness to replace the external scoreboard. Practice being misunderstood. The herd instinct uses shame to police deviation. If you cannot tolerate misunderstanding, you will return to the herd every time. Choose a safe place to practice. Say the thing that matters in unpolished language. Let someone misread you and do not over-explain. Not because you don't care about clarity, but because you will not buy your peace with self-betrayal. Over time, you discover a sturdier peace, the kind that comes from alignment. Use a risk budget. Each week, allocate a percentage of your energy to experiments that might fail publicly. 10% is plenty to start. Define the experiments in advance and decide what counts as learning. Failure is not the opposite of success here. Opacity is. You are training for anti-fragility. The more the ego is exposed to manageable shocks, the more the psyche grows beyond it. Include your body. Smallness is not just a thought pattern, it is a posture. Open your chest when you speak. Take up a little more physical space than is polite. Cold water on your face and slow breathing. Diaphragmatic breaths are not productivity hacks. They are signals to the ancient parts of you that aliveness is not an ambush. Walk without your phone and let boredom make you hospitable to original thought again. Presence is a physical act. Name your end. Memento mori is not morbid, it's liberating. If you had 1 year, what would you still performing? What would you start building? Who would you ask forgiveness from? And who would you stop asking for permission? Imagine your funeral. Which version of you do you want delivered in eulogy? The careful curator or the person who risked offense to bring their medicine? Death is the ego's ceiling. Let it be your compass. Expect relapse. The ego will put on new costumes. It will become the rebel brand. It will ask you to post your courage and count the applause. Smile at it. Thank it for its service. Keep going. You're not trying to kill it, you're broadening the field so it's no longer in charge. Do these acts and something shifts. The world doesn't necessarily applaud. And sometimes it resists. But you wake to an interior weather you haven't felt since you were young and unstrategized. You find yourself choosing the harder thing for the simpler reason. Because it aligns. You become less interested in being right and more interested in being real. The life that felt like a performance begins to feel like a conversation with something vast and near. And then a question begins to rise that is larger than rebellion. If you can choose this much, if you can unfasten a self, renegotiate a contract, serve a truth without permission, what exactly is the you that is doing the choosing? Who is free when the ego loosens its grip? The ultimate truth, the final most powerful realization. Imagine you step behind your eyes and find a room with no walls, no portraits, no trophies, no nameplate on the door, just a clear, quiet space, vast and unhurried, listening to the echoes of your thoughts as if they were birds passing through. You expected a throne, you expected a judge. You find instead an open sky that does not need to prove itself to the clouds that cross it. If the ego loosens and you are still here, what are you? Notice the mind reach for answers, a role, a story, an origin. It tries to grasp an object because objects are countable, defendable, displayable. But something in you is older than every object you've ever held. Before you learned your name, there was seeing. Before you learned your worth, there was breathing. Before you learned how to perform, there was the trembling fact of being. That, not the costume, not the chorus, has been quietly carrying you since the beginning. The ultimate realization is disarmingly simple and endlessly demanding. You are not the mask, you are the light behind it. You are not the narrative, you are the noticing. You are not the weather of moods, wins, and failures. You are the sky that can hold them without needing them to stop. This is not poetry for comfort, it is a shift in jurisdiction. When you identify with the mask, everything is existential. Being wrong is a death. Being ignored is a death. Changing your mind is a death. The ego must keep you small because smallness is controllable. The world is filigreed into binary verdicts. Win, lose, worthy, unworthy, us, them. But when you identify with the field that witnesses, a different geometry appears. Fear can move through you without instructing you. Desire can ripen without owning you. Embarrassment can color your cheeks without declaring you an exile. What if the you that is meant to live a big life is not a larger persona, but a larger capacity? Not a monument, but a meadow? Think back to every time you felt fully alive. Those unguarded seconds when you forgot to monitor yourself. Laughing so hard you cried. Working until the sun rose because an idea demanded you. Holding a friend's hand in a hospital corridor. Standing at the edge of the sea while it roared. In those moments, your identity didn't disappear. It just stepped back. Presence took the main role. You weren't small or big. You were available. The ego fears this because availability is vulnerability. But look closely. When presence leads, you become strangely resilient. You can be honest without becoming brittle, ambitious without becoming grasping, tender without becoming breakable. Why? Because the stakes are no longer your survival as a concept. You are lodged in something wider than approval. This is where all the paradoxes reconcile. The more you aim at greatness, the smaller you feel, because you're feeding the mask, which perpetually compares. The more you aim at presence, the more greatness happens as a side effect, because you get out of the way of what wants to move through you. The less you protect your image, the more power you have, because power is attention unhooked from self-obsession. The less you strive to be special, the more unique your expression becomes, because imitation falls away when you're busy listening to what is true right now. Call it soul if the word fits. Call it consciousness if it doesn't. Call it life, call it the witness. Call it the unkillable clarity behind your eyes. Language bends here. The point is contact. When you are in contact, the ego becomes a tool instead of a tyrant. It can organize your day without deciding your worth. It can defend a boundary without declaring war. It can take a bow and then get off the stage. You might ask, isn't this just another identity, the spiritual one, the enlightened one? Only if you frame it that way. The deeper move is humbler. It is to trade certainty for sincerity, to stop performing wisdom and start practicing attention. To let your conclusions be provisional and your presence be non-negotiable. To trust that reality, encountered directly, will ask things of you precise enough to make you exact and generous at once. Look again at the pain that taught your ego to contract. It wasn't lying. There were rooms you couldn't survive as a child. There were storms you had to outwit. The smallness was a bridge. Honor it. Then notice what has changed. You have hands now that can build shelter. A voice that can say no, allies who can stand with you, a nervous system that can be trained to ride bigger waves. If the bridge becomes a house, you never see the other shore. The final fierce kindness is to stop asking the ego to do the soul's job. The ego manages, the soul imagines. The ego preserves, the soul creates. The ego calculates, the soul commits. Let each serve in its realm. Put the manager in charge of logistics. Put the maker in charge of meaning. When they switch badges, your life becomes a spreadsheet pretending to be a symphony. What does this look like on Tuesday morning? It looks like checking in with the sky before you check your messages. It looks like asking, what is the truest thing I can do next? And doing that even if no one claps. It looks like letting silence edit your sentences. It looks like treating your work as an altar, not a billboard. It looks like forgiving yourself quickly so you can return to participation. It looks like risking the conversation that could change the relationship because truth is part of love. It looks like keeping your heart soft in a world that rewards armor because you know softness is not weakness. It's permeability to reality. You may not get more applause. You will get more horizon. The old struggles will begin to make sense. Of course you felt stuck. You were trying to move a mountain with a teaspoon, rearranging identity while avoiding being. Of course you felt exhausted, managing your image as a full-time job with no weekends. Of course you felt haunted. Unlived life does not quietly retire. The moment you shift allegiance from appearance to actuality, the machinery quiets. Not because life simplifies, it often complicates, but because you stop arguing with it. There will still be fear. There will still be grief. There will still be mistakes. They are not evidence you failed at awakening. They are evidence you are alive. The difference is that you will meet them as weather, not as verdict. You will be able to say, I was wrong, without dying. You will be able to say, I want this, without apologizing. You will be able to say, I don't know, without contracting. You will be able to say, I love you, and mean the kind that includes truth. One day someone will ask you who you are, and you may find yourself answering with a verb. I listen, I build, I tend, I learn, I love. You will notice that nouns still exist. You still have a name, a craft, a history, but they no longer have you. You will discover you can be many things because you are the space in which those things happen. So, step into the room with no walls. The guard will still be at the door, faithful and a little afraid. Thank them. Tell them the job has changed. There are fields to cross now, and the sky is wide, and there is work to do that requires a heart unarmored and hands ungloved. Walk out anyway, even if your knees shake, especially then. Tomorrow morning, the mirror will offer your face back to you. Look at it as if it belonged to a friend you're devoted to protecting and unleashing in equal measure. Place a palm on your chest. Feel the animal of you, warm and insistent. Let a single question lift like a dawn over your day. What would I do right now if I were not performing myself? Then do that, and then again, until your life becomes a series of answered dawns. The world does not need a perfected you. It needs a you in motion, a you in conversation with what is truest, a you willing to be seen as unfinished while you bring your particular medicine. Let the smaller self ride in the passenger seat, chatty and opinionated and occasionally right. You take the wheel. Aim not at bigness, but at reality. Aliveness will do the rest. The door is open. The sky is patient. Go.